Welcome to the Rocky Road Podcast, brought to you by Rockbusters, with your host, Dennis Wager. Dennis is a best-selling author and an expert in demolition, rock, and concrete breaking, as well as a professional blaster. He is also president of Rockbusters Incorporated, along with his son, Brian. On the podcast, you'll hear exciting stories of how these challenge types of rock and concrete jobs are done. You learn about the uses of expanding grout and explosive devices. But furthermore, you'll hear about some of the hurdles and struggles entrepreneurs and business owners have had along the way, how they got started, and how they broke through the obstacles and found the path to success. Along with that, some insight for young people and people wanting to get into the industry. So listen in. I hope you enjoy the show. Now, here is Dennis Wager.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. I want to bring on our guest today, Dave Kropf. He is actually the producer, the man behind the scene here, the one that makes all this wonderful podcast stuff available and makes it all work. Welcome aboard, Dave.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Dennis. Really, really do appreciate it. And thanks for letting me be a part of this great podcast and everything that's going on with Rockbusters. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you've done a great job, and I'm happy to have you on the show. I think it's great for people to get to meet you and learn about what you do. It's kind of unique for a lot of us. Many people have podcasts, but I think it's kind of like a book. Like many people want to write a book or think about writing a book, but the ones that actually do are like not in the major percentages, right?
Yeah, doing a podcast, I've been producing podcasts since 2005, back in the Wild West days where we were all just making it up, as we went. And even before it was on iTunes, and it was really complicated. And it's really interesting, like within the last 5 years, and especially, during COVID and lockdown, it seems like everybody on the planet said, we need a podcast. And it's become, I don't know, it's like the 21st century fax machine. If you have a business, you probably need to look on some level of having a podcast, just like having an Instagram and having a YouTube channel and everything. It's just becoming part of the modern portfolio of how business gets done. And so being able to communicate via a podcast, like a show like yours, about rock breaking and about entrepreneurship, and me coming, I live in Orlando. I know nothing about rock breaking, and every episode I learn something new. It's fascinating.
That's funny.
I really get a lot out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the same for me. Like I love learning things, and it's kind of how I got to where I am, just by being curious about things and learning things. And, what I found is, with this business, it's been like so much different now to get your message across or get in front of people. So people get to learn who you are. It's way different than the old days. I remember, not to date myself, but the yellow pages, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Well, even before they had prefixes in the phone numbers, it was just 7-digit phone number.
Right.
I remember like a long time ago when you paid quite a bit of money. I think we paid $700 a month for yellow page ads, and now it's just nobody even has a yellow page.
No, and they would drop that big giant book.
Yeah.
On your doorstep every year.
Every year. That's right. Yeah. And here you go. Look up what business you want to hire, right?
Yeah, I know. And people would pay ads, and they would, various degrees of complexity, and big giant ads or little tiny ads. And, and having a social presence, having a podcast, that is, I just think, the natural progression of that same idea.
Yeah, I do too. It's exactly like that. And, what's different now is all this digital stuff, like, between Google ads, your website, YouTube, making videos, and the podcast. Now I'm writing a book also. So like to learn all of these things, it's kind of like a job in itself before you even get to run a business, right?
Yeah, it used to be if you had a Yellow Page ad, you would just call Yellow Pages, and then they would connect you, and they would say, "Okay, just tell us what you want on it," and then they would go,
have their little, once a year you had to do that, and then you forget it. Yeah. Then you
but now it's like, no, you have a podcast. You're going to be on. You're going to talk into a microphone every week, or every 2 weeks, and
Yeah, and all down to the what kind of microphone do you get, and all the
Yep.
sound checks and just
Yeah, I
all
mean,
the
just
little bits.
yeah, just before we started, I'm like, okay, we were talking microphone technique. We
Yeah,
have to be off axis and speak over the microphone. It's a side address microphone. We need to avoid plosives, all these things that as an audio technician and a producer of audio content, I think about, just like you think about foundations and cracks and rocks and explosives. I deal in plosives.
yeah, we were
You
laughing at
deal
that.
in
Yeah, I didn't know what a
explosives.
plosive was until you told me. so, so now I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
For the listeners, a plosive is when you pop into a microphone. So I'm going to take my little windscreen off.
yeah,
This is a plosive, and my apologies.
got it.
That's
Got
a
it. Yeah.
plosive.
So that's what you don't want, and that's what happens when you aren't paying
Right.
attention to it.
Right.
But
And now I just realized I just made future Dave has a headache because I'm going to have to fix that plosive I just had.
yeah. So how did
that's
you get
fine.
started
That's
in
fine.
this?
Well, I'm a musician, and I'm a composer and a producer, and I make music for film and TV. It's what I do. It's what I teach. I teach at Full Sail University here in Florida, and I teach production music. So if you've seen like the NFL on CBS or the PGA on CBS or like shows on Discovery Channel, then chances are you might have heard some of my music, and that's what I do. But the overlap of music production and audio production, it sometimes is a circle. The Venn diagram is almost a circle because it's so many of the same tools. It's a digital audio workstation. It's recording techniques. It's microphones and cables and plugins and compressors and all those kind of things. And so back in college, I did some radio. I took a radio production class, and I have done voiceover work. I've done podcast hosting. I've done audiobook production. And so I've done all of that because I'm able to use the same tools I use as a composer and as a musician. And in 2005, I wanted to have a drumming podcast because I'm a drummer by
Oh, okay.
trade. I was
I
in
didn't know that.
sixth grade band and all that stuff. Yeah, there's a drum set in the background
Okay,
here
interesting.
and everything. So I'm a drummer, and I wanted, when podcasts first started, I looked for drumming podcasts, and there were not very many at all. And if there were, they weren't very good.
Okay.
The microphones weren't great. You're asking me to listen to you for half an hour at a time, and it sounds terrible. I just can't be bothered. So I started creating a podcast called Drummer Talk, which is still out there. You can still subscribe to it, I guess. We haven't made episodes since 2016, but I created the podcast that I wanted to exist, which was a drumming podcast that was educationally focused because I'm also a teacher. And I did that for like 12 years. I produced that podcast.
Okay, wow.
260 episodes or something like that. And it just kind of fizzled out as my career went from being a drummer into being a composer. I transitioned into making composing podcasts. And then as I was still making this content, I would produce a show for a friend or for a colleague who would then turn me on to another colleague who would then turn me on to another colleague. For example, I did the podcast and I still do, for the Experience of the Soul podcast channel.
Okay.
And that has different shows on it. And one of those shows is Monique McDonald's podcast, The Magnetic Voice.
Yes.
And so through the client from the Experience of the Soul put me in touch with Monique McDonald, who brought you on as a guest for her show.
Yes.
Because you guys did, you were like authors on a book together, and you'd gone to like some conferences, I believe.
Right. We met up at a boot camp in Orlando.
And then you got in touch with me through Monique, which was through the Experience of the Soul, which was because I produced a drumming podcast back in 2005. So it just organically grew from there.
Cool. That's really cool. And what are your ideas or goals to go forwards? Like, do you have what do you see in the next few years?
Well, I mean, I don't think podcasts are going away. I love how the tools have become greatly simplified. Like even like 5 years ago, the microphone that you're using right now, the microphone that I was able to send you or to point you to, it was maybe a couple $100. It wasn't that expensive.
Right.
And just some headphones and a little bit of microphone technique, and you can do so much. So I see that the technology has kind of democratized podcasting and made it much more accessible and much more available to many more people. I mean, you could about record a podcast just with your phone. The trick becomes in doing it consistently, doing it well, because not everybody is cut out to talk into a microphone for 30 minutes with a guest, or even more challenging, by themselves.
Yes.
So what I see is helping to facilitate folks who want to do exactly what you're doing. Like I think the days of coming to Orlando and going into a recording studio and recording a podcast, I think those are kind of over for the majority of folks. People will still do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have your Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend podcast. You have the triple A names, but for kind of the average person, I think that's very out of reach. And I don't even think it's necessary. I think the tools are available. The technology is available to make it much more accessible. So what I want to do is help. So right now, we're recording this in a virtual recording studio that we have connected through, and every episode that you've watched is recorded this way.
Yes.
And I take the audio and the video and I sync it and I edit it and do some color correction and clean up the audio so it sounds as good as humanly possible, and post it up onto podcast service. I hand it off to your team. They post it up onto YouTube. And so I want to be that person who can help facilitate people who want to get into a podcast, get into making podcasts.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have any plans on how to reach out to more people to get more clients to do that, or anything like that?
To be honest, just like any entrepreneur, you always have so many little irons in the fire, and whichever one is burning brightest and hottest, that gets all of your attention. Because if you don't, it's either going to go out or it's going to burn wildly out of control. So you've got to tend to it. And so podcasting has and being a podcast producer has just kind of been on the burner. And I don't really have any plans other than just letting it organically grow, connecting with folks, doing what we're doing here, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. If you want to reach out, you can go to 818studios.com. That's the numbers 818studios.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can email me directly at dave@818studios.com. I'm happy to chat with you.
Great. And I got to say, I've been very happy and very impressed with the quality of the end results. I think the look and the audio, everything has been fantastic. So
thank you. Yeah. And I really do enjoy doing it. The challenge of, we have guests from all over the world with various comfort levels with technology, let's say,
yes,
with various acoustical challenges. We'll say that.
Yes. And time zones too. Like, time zones have been challenging too, because you get people on the other side that, it's they're hours ahead or behind, right?
Yeah. We've talked to folks in Australia. We've talked to folks in, I think, Ireland, right?
Yeah. And Sweden, and UK and London.
Yeah. And so navigating all of that, cleaning up audio, it's kind of like puzzle solving. Like, how can you make the best possible audio? I mean, there's only so much you can do. I can't make somebody who is talking into a webcam in a big conference room, I can't make them sound like they're in a vocal booth.
Right.
But I can make it sound better than, a little webcam microphone.
Yeah. So. What can you tell us about audiobooks?
As far as producing an audiobook or enjoying an audiobook?
Yeah, either. Maybe just like whatever you feel like going into there. Like it's in general, I
enjoy listening to audiobooks because I'm a composer and a musician. I don't, as surprising as it's going to sound, I don't listen to music recreationally, hardly at all.
Interesting.
Because it's work, right? You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
It's like, it's hard to turn off my part of the brain that is absorbing music and trying to do something with it, because I know all the forensic back end of what makes music.
Yeah.
Listening to music recreationally or passively is a real challenge.
So it's kind of like the plumber going home and fixing his leaky pipes then.
That's right. Yep.
They can wait.
The dentist
I got to
kids have
fix
crooked teeth,
I got to fix
right?
pipes all day.
Right, exactly. Or chefs, the last thing they want to do.
My own. Yeah, right. Yeah, phone and get some pizza.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like that. So that said, I consume audiobooks and podcasts. Like if I'm out doing my bike riding or whatever, I'm not listening to music 99 times out of 100. I'm listening to audiobooks. So I enjoy audiobooks. All that having been said, audiobooks are a unique challenge to record and to produce.
Okay.
To the point where I've done a handful of them. My longest podcast or my longest audiobook was about 8.5 hours, and it about broke me.
Wow.
Because it is, if you have a podcast, like what we're doing right now, if I say, it's okay. It's a conversation. Or if you get an email alert, no big deal. It's not a showstopper. If a plane goes by in the background, no big deal.
Right.
If I had a cruciferous vegetable for lunch and my stomach gurgles, it's not the end of the world. But in an audiobook world, that's a deal breaker. That's you have to stop. You have to do the take over again. Car goes by too loud, that ruined the take. Your stomach gurgles, your watch goes off. You have a clock ticking in the background. Those are all complete showstoppers.
Wow.
And so unless you have that perfect studio environment, and you have the patience of a saint, then you're not cut out for it. And I learned 8.5 hours into a book that I'm not cut out for this personally. Doing podcasts and all of that, that's great.
Yeah.
Because you have to produce the audiobook. You have to edit the audiobook. Then you have to do a full quality control pass. And so by the time it's done, you will have completely and forensically listened to that book no fewer than 4 times.
Wow.
So it's a lot of hours.
That's a lot of hours.
And some folks are cut out for it, man. Some folks, they thrive in that environment, but it about broke my spirit.
Yeah.
I hope that's okay to say.
Yeah, no, that's totally good. So what would the purpose be? Like if somebody's going to consider an audiobook or producing an audiobook or a podcast, I guess the podcast, like what would you say to steer people into one or the other? Like,
well, I think if you have a book that you have written and if you've written a book, you need an audiobook. Just, if it's nonfiction, if it's fiction, whatever, it's as required as good jacket art, right? I just think it's a no-brainer. And the marketplace, specifically like in the US, and I think in all of North America, is ACX, which is the Audible Content Exchange or Creators Exchange, where you can actually contract talent, audiobook talent, and this is what they do, and they do have the bandwidth and patience for this.
Okay.
You can just say, you could pay up front a per hour, like per finished hour, which could be anywhere from $60 to $600 per finished hour.
Okay.
Or you can do a royalty split.
Okay.
And so where you're saying, hey, we're going to get 50-50 on the audiobook sales, which generally means no upfront money from the author.
Right.
And then you just split the back end. And then there's also hybrid. So you pay you pay less upfront and then some back end. But if you have a book, and I know you're writing a book, producing an audiobook is, I think, required.
That's interesting, because I haven't thought about that, but it sounds like a great idea.
Now, my encouragement for you, I don't know, you've done some podcasts. I mean, this is episode 17, so you're not a complete novice to talking into a microphone. However, being a narrator, that's a real skill. And if anybody's listening and you've listened, let's say you have a favorite entertainer or an actor or whatever, and you love their work, but their audiobook just kind of comes off a little flat.
Right.
That's because being a narrator, an audiobook narrator, is a very specific skill.
Yeah.
But that's where the Creators Exchange comes in. You give them the book, they have the vocal booths, they have the treated rooms and the good microphones, and they'll give you a good quality product.
Yeah, that would be my preference, to do it that way. It would not be to do it myself.
Yeah, I would not want to narrate my own book.
Yeah. Well, even with the podcast, people have said, "Oh, you could just do it yourself," and sure you can, but it's not the same.
Well, I think podcasts are a little bit different, and I think it's because of how people consume podcasts and the expectation of podcasts. Like the reason we can get away with a car going by or saying is because, at least for me, podcasts are fundamentally conversational, where you are talking to somebody else or you're talking to the listener.
Right.
It's very much a back and forth. Even if it's a one person show, it's still a back and forth.
Right.
It's fundamentally unscripted. And any unscripted content affords a little bit of latitude when it comes to precision, like voiceover precision. But with audiobooks, it is scripted, and the expectation is it's a very clean recording, 0 errors, and the expectation is much, much different, much higher. So if for a podcast host, they would want to hear from you. Like I wouldn't want to hear a Rockbusters podcast without you because you are Rockbusters.
Yeah, true.
You know?
That's
Whereas the story of Dennis Wager, that is an audiobook, and people, when they read a book, they aren't reading in Dennis Wager's voice. They're reading in their own internal voice.
Right, yeah,
and a good narrator will match that.
Right, yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you're doing an audiobook narration, do you do it like in chapters, like the book, and then you put the chapter? Yeah, okay. That's what I thought.
Yep. Yeah, you record in chunks and chapters. Usually, like for me, it's 2-hour recording blocks because much beyond 2 hours and the voice starts changing and it's just because you have to be consistent. The challenge is if you have an 8-hour book that was recorded in 2-hour chunks, and an 8-hour book, a finished hour of audiobook will take anywhere between 2 to 4 hours to produce.
Okay.
So if we think the extreme of that, 4 hours, so in a 2-hour block, you're only getting 30 minutes of the book done.
Wow.
Right?
So I mean, you could spend 30 hours on an 8-hour book.
Yep. 100%. And so the challenge is that it has to sound consistent. The recording quality, everything has to sound consistent. And it even comes down to, like when I did the 8.5 hour book that I did, called, I believe it's called, I'm totally flaking on, it's Mindy Corporan is the author, and it's her story. It's a kind of an autobiography. And if we took a break, when she came back from break, if she had tea with honey, her voice would sound different than if she didn't have tea with honey earlier in the day.
Wow.
Her voice would just physiologically sound different. And because it's such a sterile, pristine environment, the microphone would absolutely pick up on that.
That up, yeah. That's crazy.
And then, yeah, taking a lunch break, coming back from lunch, when I said like cruciferous vegetable, she had asparagus.
Yeah.
She had Brussels sprouts.
That's the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, she had Brussels sprouts for lunch, and she came back from the break, and we about couldn't do the session because her stomach was just gurgling, and she's this close from a mic, and it's super quiet, and you'd hear mouth noises and gurgling, which is all really gross when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's a very unique set of challenges.
Yeah, it's almost like here's your glass of water for lunch.
Exactly.
That's all you get.
And it became that we didn't try to take lunch breaks.
Yeah,
right. We would take a break in between, but yeah, it's a challenge. All those details are why I don't want to get into audiobooks because I don't have the contained, pristine environment, and cars and air conditioner coming on just would ruin takes. These are all things that professional studios have already worked out.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, no, the podcasts are pretty fun. I've enjoyed doing them so far, and it's actually been a really great way to deepen relationships with people, because a lot of the guests I've had on the show are people I've known for many, many years. And here's the thing: when you you might be listening to this, and if you're listening to this, you probably understand the rock busting industry and that whole you might already understand that. But for me, I know very, very little about it, and I always learn something. But it's amazing hearing people talk about their expertise
with the same level of passion that I have talking about like writing music or doing audio production. Right. Like I'm like lit up and like blah, 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 right?
Right.
Because I can talk about production, audio, music. I could literally talk about that all day.
Right.
And it's amazing hearing people talk about explosives and about like grout and granite work with that same excitement. And that's when you know like that person's doing the thing that they need to be doing because it comes out of their spirit, you know?
Right. And for me, like, many years ago is when I had my demolition company and I was on the board of directors for the National Demolition Association. And one of the things that at that point came to light for me was how I could meet with guys in different locations around North America. And some of these people had big companies and they were more than willing to help you and give you advice and say, oh, this is how we do it, where you would never get that from working locally. And now what's really changed for me is learning kind of the full cycle of rock. You look at, I don't know if you've ever been to Italy, but you drive or on the train past these huge marble quarries and you think, oh, well, look at that. That's where my marble countertop comes from, right? Or my granite countertop comes from. But you don't think about, the blasting in mines. You don't think about, blasting for houses and blasting beside railways where it's difficult. And how do you take that rock and make it instead of a waste or just a crushed product into aggregate, how you can really make it into a way more valuable product. And then you take that and you kind of move it across the world, right? And you go, okay, well, it's very interesting. Like, the different economy in London, as Mark Anthony was talking about, how they don't even want to do tear downs. They want to renovate buildings now. And it's really not practical. It's difficult because a lot of times, if you have a 4-story building, the easiest or the best thing is just get rid of it and build a 12-story building.
Yeah. Oh, it's in the U.S., that's definitely, the mindset.
Yeah. But
that's why we don't have buildings much older than the 70s,
Right. Well, I know
that's rip it down.
Yeah. We have a customer in New York and he's doing a project in the Bronx. And it's just that. It's like the lots now that they've designated to allow for 4-story buildings or 3-story buildings. They've changed the building codes to now allow for 12-story buildings. And then what that does is, when you go up, you have to go down, so instead of having 1 level parking, you have 2 or 3. Well, with a 12-story building, you have 2, but it's all rock. So now they're going, oh my God, what do I do? And it's this.
Well, I'm glad you asked.
It's kind of like the microphone, right? It's just, it's like, okay, well, that's so simple. If I only I didn't need to know that before, so I didn't learn it, right? It's the same as building a parking lot.
Whether it's rock or whether it's podcasts, the idea is to surround yourself with expertise.
Yeah,
right? Surround
really
yourself
is.
with people who can not work for you, not like, but they can help you move forward in the thing that you want to do. Right. And so me coming alongside you with your podcast is ultimately helping you become who you need to be for your business.
Exactly.
Your business is not microphones. It's not learning how to produce a podcast.
Yeah.
No more than the building owner's business is to learn how to make a parking lot 2 stories below a skyscraper, right? Or a building.
Right.
It's not their job.
No, exactly.
And so
And that's what I enjoyed is so much because we work with like some really big companies and we work, with homeowners. And there's such a spectrum, like we'll get involved in jobs, like in California, for example, there's one where they're taking out these huge areas and it's been like I think almost a year-long project. And they've told them from the beginning, once we get up to these certain areas, we're not going to be able to blast with high explosives. So you need to look at an alternative. And now it's like, okay, we're here and nobody thought about it. So now it's a rush, right? But it's jumping into like a big company, working with their engineers and saying, this is what I would do. I don't have all the answers, but I have methods that I know work and we can just tweak the variables about the diameter and the hole spacing and the product to match, the pressure or strength we need to break the rock. So it's interesting to see that. And it's been interesting, even when I get calls from like the US Army and they're doing underwater blasting, like in Jacksonville, and they had harbor deepening to do. I think they had 7 harbors they needed to deepen. And again, they couldn't use high explosives. So they're like, "Oh, do you think your stuff would work?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think it would." So then,
this this is the part of the podcast. I'm going to put my producer hat on.
Yeah.
We're at 1 minute.
Okay, good.
Because during the recording, I give you like a 5 minute and a countdown.
Yeah.
To keep us on track. So I'm putting my producer hat on. If you'll allow me.
Yeah.
To give you the 1 minute warning.
Yeah, that's the edited part, right?
Right. Exactly. Oh no, we're keeping this in.
Oh, okay,
baby.
good. Okay, good.
No, this is. Yeah,
I wasn't sure about that. I was looking at the clock.
Gets work.
I lost track of time. It's been very good, and like you said, the podcast, it's another aspect. It's a learning, and so valuable. It's a great way to connect with people.
Yeah, and and at the end of the day, I think it is really important. And I remember thinking, like when you were like, I'm going to make a podcast about rock breaking, and I'm like, is there really that many people looking for that? And yes, of course there are. There's that many people interested in, just like there's that many people interested in learning about music for TV or, planting or growing flowers or writing a book or something, because the world's a big, wide, great big place. And there's room for interests in everything. And so a modern business, I think, needs to expand beyond. And I think the personal connection.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And that's what a podcast, like just an ad in the Yellow Pages. I mean, that's just an ad in the Yellow Pages, but the personal connection that a podcast can afford.
Right.
So if that sounds like you, then I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out and we could talk about it and maybe get you pointed in the right direction. And even if it's not me, and somebody else, but
thanks for joining us, Dave.
Out there.
If anybody needs to reach him, he's given his information. Feel free. I highly recommend Dave to anybody interested. 818studios.com is the best email to reach out, or 818studios.com. Okay, well, that's great. Thanks very much for being here, Dave. I appreciate you taking the time, and that was awesome.
All right, appreciate you, and I'll see you soon. But bet. I'll just be on the other side of the microphone.
Okay, see you soon.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you would like to be a guest on a future episode and tell us your story, visit our website at www.rockbusters.com. If you have a project and would like to learn more about our products, or if you're interested in partnering with us and becoming a distributor, give us a call. Thanks again. We appreciate your support.